11 p.m, join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Before we get started, he's so smug because I'm calling him a journalist. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 4 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker's refused to say if he still works for the BBC after he faced questions from journalists this morning. The Match of the Day host replied, "I can't say anything," as he left his London home. However, his son's tweeted he's proud of his father and he shouldn't need to apologise for being a good person. Last night's episode of Match of the Day was watched by 2.6 million viewers. That's more than 500,000 more than the week before, despite airing without presenters or pundits. Former BBC executive Roger Bolton says the controversy's diverting attention away from the real issue.
It's this argument about what is impartiality and who must be impartial that is a wider question. Of course, the other thing that's happening here is the political parties, particularly the governing parties, see this as a wonderful opportunity in the culture wars to create trouble and divert attention from the fundamental issue here, which is illegal immigration, which is extraordinarily difficult to deal with.
The Prime Minister's flying to the United States to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, the US and Australia. It's hoped after a summit with President Biden, the Australian Premier will announce the purchase of British nuclear-powered submarines. It follows talks this morning between Rishi Sunak and the NATO Secretary-General, where the UK reaffirmed its commitment to help counter the threat of Russia. While in the United States, Mr Sunak's also expected to announce a defence and foreign policy update. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister recognises the anxiety over the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, but the government's working to find a solution to secure customers' liquidity and cash flow. Rishi Sunak says he doesn't believe there's a systematic risk to British tech companies, but the Treasury is working at pace to find a solution. The Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England have been in discussions to provide a financial backstop for affected customers. Last Friday, SFB's American parent company became the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crisis. It is now under US government control. The Health Secretary's criticised junior doctors for failing to call off their strike tomorrow, on Monday. Writing in The Telegraph, Steve Barclay's described the 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. The British Medical Associations described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as a feeble attempt to stall us. It is expected to affect many services, including A&E, cancer care and maternity care. Kevin Marr is a former Labour advisor. He told us there's still time to avoid the strike.
There's a very, very small window to try and avert what's going to be a catastrophic stoppage for the NHS. 500,000 appointments cancelled. I mean, that's the implications for patient safety are pretty profound, and that won't be lost, to be fair, either in government or by the junior doctors. And I suspect if Steve Barclay comes forward with some sort of sincere and meaningful proposal that they may curtail this strike early.
And it's one of the biggest nights in Hollywood. Later, celebrities getting ready for the 95th Oscar Awards, and British and Irish talent armed with a chance of a win. The Banshees of Inisherin has become the most Oscar-nominated Irish film of all time, with 9 nominations. British actor Bill Nye's up for Best Actor for his role in the movie Living, and Andrea Riseborough received a Best Actress nomination for her role in To Leslie. However, showbiz reporter Stephanie Tetchy says Riseborough's nomination was unusual.
Last minute, we had a wild card, Andrea Riseborough. She's British, so she is flying the flag for Brits. But she starred in this film called To Leslie, in which she plays an alcoholic. And no one had heard about this movie, Stephen. It was literally a week before nominations. And this is what you call star power. People like Gwyneth Paltrow, Charlize Theron and Jennifer Aniston, they got behind it and campaigned and said this should be up for an Oscar nomination. So it was very much a nomination by social media.
We'll see what happens in Hollywood later. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now let's get back to Nana.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Beware the Ides of March. Now, a lot of people are talking as though the next party to lead this country will be a Labour one, as though it is inevitable that Sir Keir Starmer will be our next Prime Minister. That is, as long as, of course, the Tories don't do a Liz Truss in the meantime. But with the news that the UK has unexpectedly swerved a recession and with green shoots of recovery on the horizon, could the Tories turn the ship around? And even if they manage it, will anybody actually trust them? Because it seems that since Rishi's acceptance by Ursula von der Leyen, who, I mean, how can you forget the glazed eyes, the way she looked at him, and the clear bromance between him and French President Macron, the Rishi's leadership may well have legs, albeit not very long ones. Oh, sorry, I couldn't resist. It would appear that according to a recent Savanta poll, Labour's lead over the Conservative Party has dropped to 11 points, its lowest figure since December. Sir Keir Starmer's party, which has regularly had a 20-point lead in recent months, now has 43% of the vote, which is still high, but the Tories at 32% are closing the gap. Rishi Sunak's landmark Brexit deal and his hard line on immigration may well be hitting the mark with the British people. In contrast to Sir Keir Starmer's repeated U-turns, where he appeared to have changed his stance on freedom of movement, and decisions like his appointment of supposedly impartial Sue Gray to high office following her heading up the Partygate inquiry, have left many to question his integrity and his judgment. And when he can't even clarify when he made his approach to her, listening to him swerve answering this was painful. Or when he and other members of his party are not prepared to commit to a definition of what a woman is and state whether one has a penis or not, It's easy to see why swing voters are beginning to question whether the Labour Party can be trusted. Surely they can't do any worse, can they? So, with the budget looming and a whisper that Jeremy Hunt will stick to his pledge to increase corporation tax to 25%, which he told GB News in an exclusive interview he called the headline rate, which he said, by the way, even at 25 is lower than nearly all our major rivals, you know, France, Germany and so on. And he also stated this.
What we now have is a responsible outlook for public finances. The markets have recognised that by bringing down mortgage rates, interest rates, and we're on track to bring inflation down. But if you're saying to me, as a Conservative Chancellor, do I want to bring down taxes? Well, I want to bring down personal taxes because that is at the heart of what being a Conservative is. But I want to bring down business taxes even more.
So can we trust them? Can we trust them to bring us back from the brink? A brink it's argued that they created. Is a Labour win inevitable? Would they fare better? It's ironic that Budget Day corresponds with the day Brutus betrayed Caesar. Beware the Ides of March. I mean, of all days, why would you pick that one? Right, before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC resign? Following Lineker's suspension and the widespread strikes where numerous football presenters refused to host their programmes, spoilt brats, in support of the Match of the Day host, pressure is mounting upon BBC bosses as to how slowly the broadcaster responded to dealing with Lineker's controversial tweet, as well as how poor the BBC's Match of the Day programme was last night, although it did get 500,000 more views than it normally does. So it seems this comes as reports suggest that BBC presenters described the Director General Tim Davies' handling of the situation as a disaster. So should he resign? Then on the way, 4:50, it's time for Worldview. I'll be joined by political commentator Danny Armstrong and host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge, to discuss the top stories from around the globe. Stay tuned for this week's Outside. I'll be joined in the studio by a leading face of equality in construction. You have seen this lovely lady on your TV screens before, battling it out on the BBC game show. Can you guess who it is? I know it's tricky, I've got loads more clues on the way. That's on the way in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Look, he laughs every time, even he can't believe it.
Fully qualified BBC journalist.
I know, yes, the BBC. We will get to them. Yeah. But I'll start with you, Christine, because you're very, you know, you obviously, you got your hand in the tether when it comes to politics.
Well, I used to.
Well, that's generous of me, you know. But what do you think of this? Because the Conservative Party appear to be making some ground with the Labour Party, and the recent developments, so Rishi Sunak coming up with this plan with Macron, a lot of people dissing it, but at least it's something. And the way he came across with Ursula von der Leyen, there seems to be progress, and it seems to be reflected in the polls.
Absolutely. I mean, I hadn't seen that opinion poll. That's extremely encouraging. Excuse me. If he can get a grip on this boat situation, I think that will greatly enhance his reputation, but it's a massive if, and he hasn't got long to do it. But if he can pull that off and people can really see that he's got proper mechanisms in hand to do it, etc., and if they see people being sent back and deported, etc., not the asylum seekers, but the illegals, then I think, yes, he could have a fair crack at the whip. But I think tax is also another huge issue, and I think you mentioned we've got the highest rate of tax for 70 years, and Hunt is apparently still intending to impose this corporation tax increase, which is nuts. You've only got to look, you don't have to look to France and Germany. Look across to Ireland, where it's 12.5, I think it is, either 12 or 12.5, and their economy is reaping the benefits of that. We would be absolutely mad to plonk this huge... He says he wants to cut the tax on business. Well, stop this corporation tax increase. But I think stopping the boat, getting a grip on that, and yes, the Tories could be in with a chance. Never thought I'd say that a few months ago.
What do you think, Danny?
Well, do you know, it's really peculiar, but I think now ditching Boris Johnson could have been, in hindsight, we spoke about hindsight last week a lot.
We love it, don't we?
We do, may have been a fortuitous decision. that the Tory party and Boris Johnson made. Rishi Sunak, you're right. He's building bridges with our friends across the English Channel. He's paying a lot of money, I think £500 million, is it?
But the French are paying more, so he's got them to pay more as well.
So that it's a collective effort then to stop the little dinghies floating over. And I think that's great. And Gary Lineker, the patron saint of illegal refugees, illegal asylum seekers, you know, and I know we're going to talk about him later, but collectively, I think society is focused on stopping those dinghies. I think that there's the liberal elite, and it's becoming a cliche, the liberal elite. But I think detached members of society who don't have to actually live in communities where the culture is being changed permanently.
Doesn't affect them.
No, it doesn't. And so I think Rishi Sunak, if he can persuade working class areas, the red wall seats, that he's doing his best to keep their cultures alive and stop the dinghies, I think he's got half a chance with the red walls even.
You mentioned Boris, and I think one of the big differences now is that we haven't got Boris, and I think people like Ursula von der Leyen and Macron, etc., they just didn't want to deal with Boris. They simply couldn't cope with him. It was no, not Boris. And I think there's instantly a much greater rapport with Rishi, and they feel he's a man, to use the immortal words, that they can do business with, and they have.
May I just go back to the corporation tax for a moment? George Osborne, before the Brexit referendum, he said that he wanted to drive corporation tax down to 15%. Now, there's a massive leap between 19% and 25%. 6 points is one hell of a big leap. Now, whether this is just a temporary thing in order to recover money post-COVID, then that's understandable, or I'd be more sympathetic to it. But 6 points is a hell of a lot, because big companies, you know, and they have the workforce that drives Great Britain, and they have a bottom line margin that at the moment they are working on 19%. So they are forecasting ahead based on 19%.
But it doesn't.
Sorry, 19%
I think.
tax.
I mean, which is it? Is it Zeneca that has just made the decision to go? I think AstraZeneca to Ireland, and more and more of these big companies.
Have big pharma's gone?
Big Pharma's gone, and more big companies.
Wow.
If this time next week we've got 25% corporation tax, I think a lot of big companies will be thinking, well, hell's teeth, no thanks, I'm going elsewhere.
But smaller companies, they will have a 19% threshold. The 25%, it's like income tax. You have to have a big turnover and a big bottom line in order to be hit by 25%. So there'll be plenty of smaller companies, you know, men and women having family businesses with a modest £300,000 turnover who may not be affected by the 25%.
And they're, of course, not so free to go. I mean, the smaller companies, the family companies, aren't so easily able to up sticks and go to another tax-friendlier regime.
But it doesn't make any sense, really, though. To be honest, going to 25% makes no sense whatsoever, because all it will do is drive inflation, because then these companies may well pass the cost of this tax on to the consumer.
It definitely will.
So the price is then going to go up. So you've got prices rising again with wages lagging behind, which is what inflation is. And we've got... Although I think that maybe his other thinking is that inflation was going to literally halve anyway, and so they're thinking that's going to come down anyway, so it's not really going to have that much of an effect. But I think they need to be very careful with this.
Well, of course, what's his name? Hunt himself, when he was standing for the leadership, he was advocating reducing corporation tax, and then he said, why have you changed your mind? Oh, well, circumstances have changed. Well, I would say that circumstances have changed again, so let's have another rethink.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with, won't it?
Has Keir Starmer said anything about what he would do with it?
Oh, he never says anything about anything.
Talking about high prices, that's how much a Snickers bar is in a Marks and Spencer petrol station.
You would know, go on.
£2.20.
£2.20
for a Snickers bar.
Not the big ones.
No, just the normal ones in a Marks and Spencer petrol station.
Did you buy it anyway?
No, I took a photograph of it. I couldn't believe it. If I was on Twitter, I would have tweeted it.
I bet it's not one of the. It's smaller than it used to be.
It's the normal one.
No, I bet it's not.
£2.20. No, £2.20. I've got a photo. I'll show you.
I bet it's smaller than what we all understand to be.
If you like, I can email it to a producer and they can put it on the screen.
No, it'd be like an advert for
here's a brilliant breaking news story.
Well, it might be slightly more interesting than the one we've got coming up next. Gary Lineker. Yeah, he's on the way. We can't resist, because seriously, we've got to talk about that. Listen, what are your thoughts on Jeremy Hunt and the whole business with the Labour and Conservative Party? Do you think that you could have some sort of faith in the Labour Party at all? Well, if you just join me, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it is time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC, Tim Daisley, should he resign? Now, following Gary Lineker's suspension and the widespread strikes from presenters across the broadcaster, Tim Davie has come under pressure to resign over what's been described as the disastrous handling of the situation. But should he? why should he? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. And there's a poll up right now asking that very question. Should the Director General of the BBC resign? Cast your vote now. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, if you just joined me, where have you been? It's all right, you've only missed 20 minutes, so it's coming up to 21 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. Don't forget, you can also stream us live on YouTube. Now, before the break, we were discussing the Tories closing the gap on the Labour Party and the Chancellor, who's set to deliver his budget next week on the Ides of March. Let's see what you've been saying. Oscar says, hi, Nana. I do think that the Tories slowly clawing their way back into public favour. Labour need to step it up. John says the Tories will not stay in power for much longer. A change is needed, whether it be Labour or another party. Bye-bye, Tories. Ross says, let's see how Hunt manages the budget. Yeah, it will be interesting. I think he needs to scrap the 25% rise, but that's down to him. We'll see where that takes him. But keep your thoughts coming. It's now time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC resign? Now, following Gary Lineker's suspension and the widespread strikes of other members of staff who don't fancy working or not, maybe they're not staff, maybe they're freelancers, which isn't very wise. I don't know why they're doing it. They've got cushy jobs. Numerous football presenters have refused to host their programmes in support of Gary Lineker. So pressure is mounting on BBC bosses as to how slowly the broadcaster responded to dealing with his controversial tweets, as well as how poor the BBC's Match of the Day programme coverage was last night. Although, to be fair, 500,000 more viewers than the week before. And this comes as reports suggest the BBC presenter described the Director General Tim Davies' handling of the situation as a disaster. Now, while speaking to the Mirror, Gary Lineker's son said his father will never back down from his tweet where he compared the government's illegal migration bill to the 1930s Germany. And this is despite Tim Davies apologising for this weekend's disruption and saying that the corporation wants Lineker back on air. Well, he has to say that, doesn't he? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC resign? First, though, let's get the latest on the meltdown of the BBC. We can speak to our GB News national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's outside Broadcasting House in London. Paul, so what's been going on? What are people talking about? What are they saying with regard to this?
What they're saying at the moment is that critics of the BBC's decision to withdraw Gary Lineker really making 2 points, which is that firstly, OK, maybe, let's just assume that he did break the impartiality rules of the BBC, which the BBC say he did, then why aren't you applying those rules consistently to other people, such as Lord Sugar, who's fronted the various 17 series of The Apprentice, criticised Jeremy Corbyn, criticised Mick Lynch, the head of the RMT, etc. He's not been hauled up for making political tweets. And then why aren't you applying that to people like Andrew Neil when he was a BBC presenter, and also even the wildlife presenter Chris Packham? So if you're going to have these rules and if you're going to enforce them, why aren't you being consistent with it? And if you are being inconsistent with it, then that brings about criticism that you're being unfair towards Gary Lineker. The second thing is, and this may be your secondary question, should the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, resign? Because critics of the BBC's decision to pull Gary Lineker are saying, should Richard Sharp resign? Because he is obviously a well-known Tory donor. He's donated £400,000 to the Conservative Party. Allegations that he facilitated an £800,000 loan to the then Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who then gave him or made him chairman of the BBC, and the implication being that in some way he helped with that loan and then that facilitated that job. Of course, allegations that Richard Sharp denies, but he is the subject of an ongoing investigation, so at the very least, should he be suspended as chairman of the BBC pending that investigation? So, first of all, the Director General of the BBC under fire for making the decision to pull Gary Lineker in the first place. Secondly, Richard Sharp, his position also under threat as well. So, big decisions for the BBC to make over the next sort of 48 hours or so. Not only because they have to get their sports coverage right in terms of today. Match of the Day 2 tonight is going to be like Match of the Day last night. It's going to have no punditry, no presentation, no commentary, but also they've got live coverage of the FA Cup quarterfinals next weekend. So big operational decisions have to be made as well as editorial ones.
Wow, I say get rid of a lot of them. Get rid of the ones who are not striking. There's plenty of people who would absolutely love their jobs. Paul Hawkins, thank you very much. It's good to talk to you. Right, well, that was our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, there giving us a lowdown. Joining me now is the former editor of The Labellist, Peter Edwards, and also former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. I'm going to start with you, Kelvin. Your thoughts on the BBC, Gary Lineker, and, of course, Tim Davie.
Well, he was right in the first place to suspend him, or I was hoping just fire him. I mean, afterwards, he'd triple his money and he could talk whatever he likes for wherever he likes. But what he can't do is talk on my money. I don't want to contribute money through a tax to somebody who's saying something I don't agree with. I just don't want to pay my money like that. In terms of television, if he wants to do it on ITV or TalkSport or anywhere, by all means, be my guest. But it's not a free speech issue. This is a rule within the BBC, like any corporation, BT Sport or Unilever. If you start saying stuff which you think actually casts a shadow over your business, boom, you're gone. What I fear now is because they are basically a collection of lovies, and that, God bless him, the Director General or the Chief Executive, as he would be in another business, now is seeing a pushback against him by the staff. Me, I wouldn't care less. Let them all go. I agree with you. There's people working for Bristol Rovers or Wigan or some small National League team who would be delighted to give their views, which would have as much impact as the Shearers and the right, who are being paid $400,000 a pop to basically say good goal, nice goal, square ball, nice pass. So actually, he should stay strong. If he doesn't stay strong on it and comes up with some kind of patch thing. I don't think he's a suitable manager, and he should go as well. So stay strong. And I also see a significant issue coming down the track that if Lineker comes back, by the way, unencumbered by rules of the company, then actually the bottom line on this is I could see a lot of people starting to say, ordinary people who don't agree with his views, saying, I tell you what I'm going to do, I'm not going to pay the license fee. So that's my next week. We are going to go on strike. Forget about you going on strike.
Peter, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think Gary Lineker did break the rules, but Tim Davie, the head of the BBC, has got to consider his position. And if you think about all the groups he works with, well, his own staff, he's lost the confidence of them, judging by the WhatsApp messages leaked to newspapers about the backroom boys and backroom girls. He's lost the confidence of the presenters, who had a de facto walkout and didn't appear this weekend. And he's lost the confidence of viewers, football fans like me, who love Match of the Day. And what we saw last night was not Match of the Day. It was just a pale imitation of some footage put together with no commentary or analysis. So I think Tim Davie has got to consider his position, because you used the word meltdown, which is absolutely right. Sometimes the word crisis is overused, but Gary Lineker broke the rules, and then the BBC completely mishandled this and got themselves into a much worse position. So it is a meltdown.
But what should they have done then, in your view?
Well, I think they should have enforced the rules, if they're going to have them, consistently, because Gary Lineker has been tweeting about politics for, 6 or 7 years. And personally, if you take out the 1930s comparison, which I think is inappropriate, I agree with him on lots of the substance. But
Well, I think that was the problem, wasn't it? The fact that he took the comparisons, and also the fact that he works at the BBC, so he's not supposed to be...
Well, no, there's two different issues. The Jewish community in Britain, to my mind, quite correctly protested about the 1930s parallel, but that wasn't the reason for his suspension. We're told stepping aside, but it was a suspension. It was because he expressed a view on essentially party politics. But he's been doing that for years. And as Kelvin alluded to, there are other broadcasters who write tweets and give opinions from the left or the right or any different perspective. So the BBC is in a complete mess over its impartiality, and that's before you even get to the point about the people running the BBC, several of whom their executives have Conservative Party backgrounds.
Well, I got in trouble for saying something on another channel, not even on the BBC, as a freelancer, and I lost 2 shows on it, so I'm not happy about that either. And I actually left because I couldn't speak out about anything, and I'm very glad that I found GB News. But don't you think that it's quite hypocritical of the BBC that it's got the likes of Lord Sugar, Karen Brady? Calvin, do you think that that's a similar situation? These guys have expressed their views.
Yeah, look, I'm in favour of boot Lord Sugar straight off. I wouldn't think twice about it. So I'm not worried about. He's got enough money and enough. He's old enough. He's as old as me. He can get on with his life. I couldn't care less. I'm not in favour of Sharp remaining as chairman of the BBC either. After all, I applied for that job, and so I'm looking forward to Sharp being booted out so I can reapply. But on a serious matter, he should never have been given the job in the first place. It was quite outrageous. And Boris is a shocker in this respect, absolute shocker. However, it doesn't get away from the single issue, which is that Lineker may well have been doing it for years. This time he crossed a line. God knows why he hadn't crossed the line before. I would have been in favour of getting rid of him years ago, right? And the idea that Match of the Day can't exist without all these people, I agree, it wasn't fantastic, but I watched it, I enjoyed it, because what it was basically giving a V sign, right, to the left, right, and saying we can get on. And so that's why I'm in favour of the strike being defeated. I want it to be defeated in the same way as I want the RMT to be defeated. I don't like the kind of bullying blackmail of these guys. Let them go and work somewhere else. There's loads of people who would love that job at £400,000 to go to Salford once a week to say good, nice pass, poor pass. It's ridiculous.
Peter, you're shaking your head.
It's not bullying, and I wouldn't call it a strike either. It's certainly a walkout. I don't know. I'd be a little bit surprised if Gary Lineker was in the National Union of Journalists, as I used to be when I was a newspaper reporter. But this, to me, is not really about left and right. This is about the BBC getting itself in a mess initially over its impartiality rules, getting in a mess over several years. I think one thing I do agree with Kelvin on is inconsistency, because Gary Lineker tweeted a lot about other immigration asylum policies and about Brexit, but it's nothing to do with the left. I think the problem for the BBC is that they've they've caved into the government, and that didn't involve any input from Keir Starmer. They really panicked when the government became upset about Gary Lineker's tweets. So I think that's what's led to the line being crossed after 6 or 7 years of Gary Lineker's tweeting.
Do you really think...
Can I just say, I don't think that's entirely true. The truth about the matter was, Lineker was told last time, look, mate, you are a famous person. We have a rule that covers that, which says that if you are famous, you've got to be very careful. Well, and by the way, so he got a slap on the wrist for that. This time, he goes the full whole hog and manages to aggravate an entire community and also get it completely and utterly wrong by putting Nazism in there. And the issue, the other issue I would take issue with you on this is that, in fact, if you divide it up into the politics, the migration issue, those in favour of it are basically of the left, and those who are against it are basically of the right. So, there are lots of things in this pot. I am not in favour of paying my tax to hear politics from the left or the right from the BBC. If Sky want to do it, or BT Sport want to do it, or somebody, or GB News wants to do it, that's fine by me. I'm not paying for it, right? I am paying for it at the BBC. I just don't want it. And I'm sure lots of people are like me.
Well, listen, Kelvin, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun. Also, Peter Edwards, former editor of The Labourist. Thank you so much. Well, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for a Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should the Director-General of the BBC resign? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Then coming up at 5, it's this week's Outside. This Bolton local is known for giving speeches all across the UK, inspiring and motivating young women to pave a way forward for themselves in construction. Here's another clue. She married her game show or reality TV co-star. We'll call it reality TV co-star. Keep sending me your thoughts. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It is coming up to 25 minutes to 5. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. BBC sport coverage has been affected by last-minute changes for a second day as presenters boycott the broadcaster in solidarity with Gary Lineker. The Match of the Day host was asked if he still worked for the BBC this morning. I can't say anything was his answer. Now, his eldest son says he thinks the presenter will go back to Match of the Day, but won't ever back down. The Six Nations coverage has gone ahead as scheduled, but it's understood Match of the Day 2, as it was last night, will be much reduced with no presenter, pundits or commentary. The Prime Minister is flying to the United States to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, the US and Australia. It's hoped that after a summit with President Biden, the Australian Premier Anthony Albanese will announce the purchase of British nuclear-powered submarines. It follows talks this morning between Mr Sunak and the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, where the UK reaffirmed its commitment to help counter the threat of Russia. And the Health Secretary's criticised junior doctors for failing to call off strike action on Monday. Steve Barclay, writing in The Telegraph, described the 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. The British Medical Association's described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as a feeble attempt to stall us. It is expected to affect many services, including A&E and cancer and maternity care. TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News, and Nana will be back in just a few moments' time.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good afternoon. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Remember, you can download the GB News app for free and check out all the programmes on the channel. But now it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC, that is Tim Davies, should he resign? This is following Gary Lineker's suspension and the widespread strikes. Other members of staff or presenters and freelancers who have refused to host, pundits have refused to go on the programme. Ian Wright, others like that, Alan Shearer, did not present Match Today last night. They didn't go on, all in support of Gary Lineker. Now, pressure is mounting upon the BBC bosses as to how slowly it responded to dealing with Lineker's controversial tweet, as well as how poor the Match of the Day's programme coverage was, although, like I will add, 500,000 more viewers. So clearly, people are quite happy to watch without these people. Now, this comes as reports suggest a BBC presenter described the Director General Tim Davies' handling of the situation as a disaster. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should the Director General of the BBC resign? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Danny Kelly, listen.
Well,
you are like me. You're a BBC person. You worked there before.
Ex-BBC, 15 years.
Yeah, this
Successful
is great.
talk show host.
I have a BBC sandwich.
Did you? This must be your favourite moment. Talk to me about what happened with you.
I mean, I was once suspended for a week by the BBC, and the newsroom didn't walk out in support of me.
Really? What did you do?
Well, I was the first to announce the death of Her Majesty, and that was back in 2010.
So she was still alive?
She was fighting fit. It was a sketch that had gone badly wrong. And it made worldwide news all around the Commonwealth. As you can imagine, the BBC announcers...
That was funny. It was supposed to be
It was hilarious at the time.
Was it?
It's not funny now that she's dead, no. But at the time,
this is why you were suspended.
Yeah, exactly.
But why, if it was funny, and if viewers thought it was funny and people agreed that it was funny, why were you suspended?
Because the BBC didn't find it funny, announcing that she'd died.
You're
That's
not allowed
why.
to do that.
You're not allowed to say
I wouldn't
Queen's
have
dead.
found it funny.
Well,
no.
The BBC have a very strict open procedure, and
of course.
if you dare say that, then literally the controls of your radio studio will be taken over by another part of the BBC, and then it's literally like we'll take it from there.
Right.
So if you did that, what did your bosses do to you? I mean, what happened? My God.
I thought I was going to lose my job, and the next day I had a secret meeting because, believe it or not, all the paparazzi came to the Birmingham mailbox to get a photo of me, and the Daily Mirror knocked on the door the next day. Someone told him where I lived. So I thought I was going to lose my job. I didn't lose my job, thankfully. But to be suspended by the BBC, it's almost like a badge of honour, as long as you can go back and... Because the audience figures went through the roof. Now, back to Gary Lineker for a second. The question is, should Tim Davie resign? Should he fall on his sword? Well, I don't see what that is going to gain. I think we should wait to see the outcome of the Lineker case. I just wish Gary Lineker would row back on the 1930s rubbish, say he got that wrong, and then there's middle ground for him to come back to work. But that doesn't leave the other elephant in the room about him once again getting involved in politics. He's like the Greek mythological figure Icarus, who is so full of self-confidence, he actually builds himself some wings made of feather and wax, and his father says, don't fly too close to the sun. But he's so arrogant, he flies so close to the sun, it melts the wings, he crashes to Earth and dies.
I wish he would do that, Icarus.
So,
no, not dying, obviously, but I mean, Icarus crashing. The analogy of what you said there.
Yeah.
I just wish that the BBC had acted sooner when Lineker crossed the line by saying political. I mean, they are, as your debate just now pointed out, they are paid for by us, and we do not pay for partial views from people who are either left or right. It doesn't matter. The fact that Danny... sorry, you're Danny.
Gary.
The fact that Gary Lineker is on the left is just what he happens to be. But I agree. If only Gary Lineker had the footballs to say, I went too far, I should not have made that analogy.
But he doesn't think he...
No, but if he would just do that, that would give the BBC an olive branch. It would be some way, because they have now got an absolute car crash on their hands.
I think let's just get rid of him. Look, I mean, the man has made many errors already.
And get rid of all the other people who don't turn up for their contracts. They've got a contract, they don't turn up.
I think what they've done
someone
is
else.
given the BBC an opportunity to have a clear-out. The BBC has already been clearing out a lot of staff who apparently are older. I think that's what it looks like to me. But they're clearing out some of the dead wood that's there. Some of the staff are brilliant, but that's what...
They're not dead yet, they're just older.
Well, that's just a praise for people that are old. Anyway, so that's what they've done. And I would say that if you have such a privileged position, frankly, you're not aware of how fortunate you are. And there are plenty of other very talented broadcasters who would be more than happy to take up the slack and take those roles. But what I would say, looking at it, is that Gary Lineker should have been pulled up a lot earlier. Because it's not fair for people like me who lost things through the BBC because I said something on another channel that had nothing to do with the BBC at all, but they decided it had breached their guidelines and they didn't like it, so I got punished. But yet Gary Lineker can go out on this big soapbox, go to Qatar, be paid 1,000 times more than I was being paid, but yet he can continue. And I think that's what irritates me. It's not that he's, when he insulted me, it's not that. I don't care, he can say what he likes. But it's the fact that he worked for the BBC and did it and they did nothing.
Do you know, you're mentioning Qatar, that would have been a moment when Gary Lineker could have stood up and made a stand for human rights and gay rights. Well, but he still went out there and took acres of money to go and do it.
Oh, you mean by not going?
By not going. He could have said, yes, this is a wonderful opportunity, I love football, but I'm going to make a stand and I'm not going to go. And he failed to do that.
Going back to Tim Davie, I want him... Not only I don't want him to resign, but I want him to discipline everybody who refused to go to work, because they have let the licence fee payers down. £159.5 a year, and people can't experience final score. Because I don't have Sky Sports, I have all the Sky stuff, and I wanted to see how Everton were getting on. And normally I'd turn on BBC One.
Of them, though,
it's awful.
It's not about them, you see.
It's contemptuous.
It's not about them. It's the licence payer who literally pays their salary. So for them to think, oh, well, I'm going to go out and support a Gary Lineker because I'm not happy, well, that's fine.
Go, but
the only people
don't come back.
Is us, but don't come back. Don't come back.
Well, when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States and all the air traffic controllers went out on strike, he just said, fine, goodbye, I'll get some more. So why doesn't the BBC turn around and say, fine, you've broken your contract, you were supposed to turn up in wherever, Salford, you didn't. Supposing all the GB News presenters suddenly said, oh, by the way, I'm not turning up, would they expect to have their jobs held open and the whole thing held up for them? No.
I'd cross the picket line.
Get more people.
Call me scab all you want.
If the others said they were going on strike, I'll say, you can do it. I've got kids to feed.
Ever practical, Nana.
Exactly, forget them, they can do what they like. Right, well, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices. Their opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what they think about the topics that we're discussing this hour. I'm heading over to Kidderminster. Shall we go and have a chat with John? I can't wait to hear what John Reid has to say about this. John, nice to see you, John. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it. So what do you think about, first of all, Gary Lineker? What should happen to him? And then what do you think about Tim Davie?
Carry on, Gary. I've never heard so much pompous rubbish in all my life. I'm not a football fan at all, Nana. However, Gary can say whatever Gary likes. If people don't like it, he's making it as an individual, isn't he? If people don't like it and don't like the BBC's way they've handled him and all the other people, well, fine. Stop watching BBC, stop paying your licence fee, only take the online streaming stuff and enjoy your TV from elsewhere.
Yeah, but they could be arrested, though. That's not true. That's not fair.
That's not fair.
No, because they'd be arrested. But you know the rules. If you don't pay, you'd be arrested. So you've got to be careful. Like, it's all very, prominent of you to say that. But then if you don't do it, the police will catch up with you. You'll end up in prison.
As I understand it, Nana, if you don't take the BBC, but you only take your TV over a live streaming line, you don't need a licence to do that.
Yeah, but what about... yeah, but it's a lot to do.
A lot of people can't cope with a live streaming line. They want the television. They want the good old-fashioned television in the corner of the room. And to do that, you have to pay your £59?
Yeah, well, I don't know what it is.
You have no choice.
Yeah, John, but what about then... So, John, do you think then that Tim Davie should resign because of the woeful handling of this?
Well, I think Tim Davie has handled it in a fairly amateurish way, hasn't he? It doesn't come out smelling of roses, does he? And as for the chairman, well, there's an inquiry going on there anyway. So, let it run its course. But Gary Lineker can make whatever comments he like. And the best thing, if people say things that you don't agree with or don't like, as I do sometimes, then they just ignore it, don't they? That's the best way.
Well, it depends if you're... Well, it depends if you have to remain impartial and you signed a contract that says that you won't make judgment when the public are paying for you. But that's what he's kind of signed, so he shouldn't be commenting on political things. Listen, John, we've got to go. I could talk to you for ages. It's always good to hear your thoughts. That's John Reid there in Kidderminster. He's our great British voice. Right, well, today I'm asking whether you think that Tim Davie should resign. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Philip says, I believe Lineker should be generally free to express his views, but comparing our government to 1930s Germany is going too far and he should be sacked. Hugh says Tim Davie introduced a policy of BBC presenters, especially high-profile ones, not making their political views public. This is to preserve the appearance of the BBC being impartial, which it isn't anyway. Tim Davie needs to enforce this and, if necessary, sack Lineker if he won't toe the line. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Well, let me remind you of the statement that the BBC released earlier. The BBC have been in extensive discussions with Gary and his team in recent days. We have said that we consider his recent social media activity to be a breach of our guidelines. The BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. And when it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion-free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him, but we have said that he should keep them well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. There you have it. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is a GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for Worldview. And Ron DeSantis is reportedly gearing up for a shot at the presidency in 2024. But will it be DeSantis versus Trump in the Republican candidate race? Host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Tudrich, will be joining me to discuss that and much more after this.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on
Absolutely.
Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and it's time for Worldview. Russia's war on Ukraine rages on. The fighting continues in the city of Bakhmut. That is according to the UK Ministry of Defence. Ukraine is managing to prevent Moscow's force from advancing. Joining me now to talk about this is Russia and political commentator and Russia expert Danny Armstrong. Danny, talk to me. There's been a lot of bombings going on in Ukraine. Has the fighting reignited?
Well, yes, of course, Nana, as we were all anticipating that spring offensive and Russia would launch an attack on Thursday, it came with those 81 missiles that rained down on Ukraine. There were 9 civilian deaths, and most of those coming in Lviv in the west. There were 6 hypersonic missiles that were launched by Russia. It was one of the biggest missile attacks since the beginning of the war. Now, the fighting that's going on at the moment in Donbass, in Bakhmut, or Artyomov as it's called in Russian, is one of the biggest and bloodiest and longest battles that's going on in the war at the moment. Now, the Ukrainian side say they are committed to fighting for that city. Russia and Wagner, of course, that's the mercenary group, the private military group of Russia, Russia's private army, say they've already taken it. The fighting is actually going on at a rate of 100 or 200 Ukrainian casualties per day. Now, even though the Ukrainian side say they're committed to winning that city and defending that city, it does look like it's going to end with Ukrainian forces retreating to the west into more defensive positions and Russia actually taking it. Of course, Russia's objective, which has been relegated from a few of the pretexts on which the war was launched, is to protect and to liberate the people of Donbass. And because Bakhmut is in Donbass, that is something they will defend quite fervently. And what it shows is that Vladimir Putin will throw as many bodies and as much ammunition as needed into that meat grinder in Bakhmut to win that battle. That is what Ukraine are up against. As far as the bombing goes on.
So Danny, so what about the Russian people now with this? We've got about a minute left. What is the vibe in Russia at the moment on the war?
Well, it's pretty much the same as it always has been. There is that generational divide. People around about 35 and younger will be more opposed to the war. Those 35 upwards will be more for the war and for Putin. That's where Putin gains most of his support. As the war goes on, of course, more people are fleeing Russia and more people are seeing the bad sides and, of course, the crunch that comes with the sanctions that have been launched against Russia. There is a certain amount of support against Western values and Western ideals. It's as much as NATO expanding eastwards as it is the West and its ideals encroaching on Russia and being brought into the East and as they think, destroying Russian ideals and Russian identity and culture and, of course, language, as is in the Donbass region and what we're seeing now.
Well, listen, Danny Armstrong, thank you very much for joining me. That's Danny Armstrong. He's a political commentator. Right, well, let's travel over to America now and go to speak to the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Dudridge. Hello, Paul. How are you? Talk to me about what's going on. Tell me about Ron DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis spent Friday in Iowa. These are the beginnings of the Iowa caucuses. It'll come up next February. You go to Iowa if you're a Republican candidate, or indeed if you're a Democrat candidate, to get a feel of how the voters are going to go, whether you have support, whether you have popular support. And DeSantis was holding meetings of like 700 people. He went to Des Moines, amongst other, where else did he go? I'll tell you in a second. Davenport, that was the other place. Davenport, Des Moines. Meetings of 700 people. He did very, very well. He polled very well. Trump is going there on Monday to steal his thunder.
Now, apparently our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is flying to the US.
Yes, he's due to arrive. I tell you, the Oscar buzz is nothing compared to the excitement of Sunak arriving. I'll tell you that. We're all very, very excited. He's coming to San Diego. Clocks went forward today. I'm sorry, I don't know where I am. He's coming to San Diego. He's meeting with the Australian Prime Minister and President Biden, former Vice President Biden, obviously, to give him his proper name. And they're talking about the AUKUS. This is the submarine deal that Boris Johnson did, which was ostensibly created to stave off expansionist Chinese actions in the Pacific and to upset France. So that was the main thrust of this submarine deal that we have: Australia, US, and UK AUKUS, AUKUS submarine deal. They're all coming to San Diego to discuss it. No truth in the rumour that Rishi is checking out his property portfolio in California at the same time. That's just a scurrilous rumour.
Of course. And what about Trump? What's happening with Trump? We've got about a minute left.
Trump is being pursued by the Manhattan legal authorities. They want to slap him with a felony. They're inviting him to address a grand jury to basically find him. They want to find him guilty, basically, and they want him to participate in it. So yes, it's very likely that he's going to receive criminal charges, a felony for, I think it's misrepresenting business accounts, because they're claiming he was trying to mask a crime by falsifying business records. Watch that play out. He said he's got no intention of dropping out the 24 election, so it just gets more exciting. But yes, he's going to be the first former president indicted any week now by the Manhattan legal authorities.
Wow, God, they don't want him to do it, do they? They don't want him to win. Listen, Paul, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. They don't like him. No, but I have a feeling if they carry on like that, he'll probably definitely win. That is Paul Dudridge. He's host of the Politics People podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, Paul. This is GB News. Stay tuned, more to come in the next hour. Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio for the next hour. Me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. Up next, it's my special celebrity guest for Outside. I'll be joined by a Bolton-born redhead. Now, you've seen her before on TV, wheeling and dealing with Lord Sugar. But who is she? And for our Great British Debate later on, I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
It's 5 o'clock. Good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. BBC Sport coverage has been affected by last-minute changes for a second day as presenters boycott the broadcaster in solidarity with Gary Lineker. The Match of the Day host was asked this morning if he still worked for the BBC. "I can't say anything," was his answer. And Lineker's eldest son, though, said he thought the presenter would go back to the Match of the Day, but won't ever back down. Six Nations coverage has gone ahead as scheduled, but it's understood Match of the Day 2, as it was last night, will be much reduced with no presenter, pundits or commentary. A former BBC executive, Roger Bolton, says this controversy is diverting attention away from the real issue.
It's this argument about what is impartiality and who must be impartial that is a wider question. Of course, the other thing that's happening here is the political parties particularly the governing parties, see this as a wonderful opportunity in the culture wars to create trouble and divert attention from the fundamental issue here, which is illegal immigration, which is extraordinarily difficult to deal with.
Well, as you've just been hearing, the Prime Minister is on his way to the United States to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, the US and Australia. It's hoped that after a summit with the US President Joe Biden, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will announce the purchase of British nuclear-powered submarines. It follows talks this morning between Mr Sunak and the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, during which the UK reaffirmed its commitment to help counter the threat of Russia. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he recognises the anxiety over the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, but the government is working to find a solution to secure customers' liquidity and cash flow. Mr Sunak says he doesn't believe there's a systemic risk to British tech companies, but the Treasury is working to find a solution. Last Friday, SVB's American parent company became the biggest failure of a US bank since the 2008 financial crash. It is now under US government control. The Chancellor says he'll make absolutely no apology for being responsible with the public finances in Wednesday's budget. Jeremy Hunt could anger the Tory MPs by not introducing major tax cut in the financial plan. However, Mr Hunt says he wants the UK to have the most competitive business taxes in the world. But he says there is a need for companies to have stability that comes from being responsible. The Health Secretary's criticised junior doctors for failing to call off their strike action on Monday. Writing in The Telegraph, Steve Barclay described the 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. The British Medical Associations described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as a feeble attempt to stall us. It is expected to affect many services, including A&E, along with cancer and maternity care. Kevin Marr is a former Labour advisor. He told us there is still time to avoid the strike.
There's a very, very small window to try and avert what's going to be a catastrophic stoppage for the NHS. 500,000 appointments cancelled. I mean, that's the implications for patient safety are pretty profound, and that won't be lost, to be fair, either in government or by the junior doctors. And I suspect if Steve Barclay comes forward with some sort of sincere and meaningful proposal that they may curtail this strike early.
And it's one of the biggest nights in Hollywood later. Celebrities get ready for the 95th Oscar Awards. There is plenty of British-Irish talent hoping for a win as well. The Banshees of Inisherin has become the most Oscar-nominated Irish film of all time. It's got 9 nominations. Bill Nye, the British actor, is up for the Best Actor award for his role in the movie Living, and Andrea Riseborough is up for Best Actress nomination for her role in the movie To Leslie. However, our showbiz reporter, Stephanie Tecci, says Riseborough's nomination was unusual.
Last minute, we had a wild card, Andrea Riseborough. She's British, so she is flying the flag for Brits. But she starred in this film called To Leslie, in which she plays an alcoholic. And no one had heard about this movie, Stephen. It was literally a week before nominations. And this is what you call star power. People like Gwyneth Paltrow, Charlize Theron and Jennifer Aniston, they got behind it and campaigned and said this should be up for an Oscar nomination. So it was very much a nomination by social media.
This is GB News. More as it happens, as always. But now it is back to Nana.
Good afternoon. If you just joined me, where have you been? It's coming up to 6 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Now, still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career, and take a look at life after the job. We'll talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on The Outside. And in just a moment, I'll be joined by an entrepreneurial, I can't even say it now, an entrepreneurial legend. because when it comes to leading companies, this woman knows her stuff. Now, she doesn't let her open struggles with anxiety hold her back. Here's a big clue. She managed to make it to the finals during a time on The Apprentice. Have you guessed? No, don't worry, she's here. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? In next week's budget, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt plans to increase fuel duty to 15p per litre. That means that drivers will face increased costs despite ongoing costs of living crisis going on. And in addition, the number of people who registered fuel-consuming vehicles was higher than the number of people registering electric cars, which is highly problematic, bearing in mind the government have banned the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So is net zero economic suicide? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. And now it's time for Outside, and today I have a very special guest. She is the queen of construction, being the owner of 5 construction-related companies and using them to provide equal opportunities for women looking to work in the industry. She's also very open about her mental health struggles, giving talks on how to deal with stress and anxiety. Most notably, she appeared on BBC's The Apprentice in 2017 and even managed to make it to the finals. Did you guess? No? Well, I'm pleased to welcome Michaela Wain. Michaela, thank you very much for joining me.
Hello, thanks for having me, Nana.
It's really good to see you. So, Michaela, talk to me a bit about yourself then, because some people, I watched The Apprentice, I saw the one that you were in, but some people might not have done. So tell me a bit about yourself, your background.
Well, I mean, I've been in construction for the best part of 20 years. I had my own businesses, and to be fair, I was doing relatively well before I went on to The Apprentice. We was doing good, to be fair, but I felt like I'd just plateaued. We'd got to X amount of million turnover, and I felt like I can't progress from this point. You know, you don't know what you don't know. Who better to learn off than Lord Sugar? So, as you mentioned, I've always suffered with social anxiety. So I thought, well, this might help me.
This might
get some money, meet Lord Sugar, get over anxiety. So I went for it, went for The Apprentice, and did well, but I didn't win, and I'm really angry about it. I definitely should have won.
You think you should have won?
Yeah.
So before you got to the stage that you were in The Apprentice, why did you choose? I mean, were you in construction before that? And if so, how did you get into that? Why did you choose construction?
I think, like most people in construction, you just end up in it by accident. You know somebody who knows somebody who gives you a job. And I was actually doing a degree in religion and special needs, so worlds apart from construction.
Wow.
But and taking a year out, my dad said, you know, get a job or I'm going to kick you out, basically, because I was drinking and partying and doing all the student things. So I ended up landing a job selling advertising in a construction magazine and just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the industry, the people who I was working with, sales. I've got a big mouth, so I did quite well at that. And then it unfolded from there. I hit a glass ceiling, like I think most women experience in construction, or, you know, women in general experience that. So I decided I had no choice other than to start my own company, and then there was no ceiling.
There was no ceiling, yeah. And anyway, it's made of glass, you can break it with a stiletto.
Yes, there we are.
And you got onto The Apprentice. What was it like? Did it bring you the things that you thought it would bring? And what was perhaps the most interesting thing that you discovered there?
Yeah, it was, to be fair, it was a lot more intense than I thought. You know, when you watch it as a viewer, you're like, oh, why have they done that? And why have they made this terrible decision? But actually, when you're in there, you're constantly working, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping right, no connection with your family. So I guess it creates a really tense environment, and one that I definitely wasn't used to, just not having my circle of friends and family around me to help me through just difficult and challenging times. But you know what? I just had a really good time. I just thought, this is one opportunity, be here forever long. I remember saying to my mum, hey, imagine if I'm on telly for 4 weeks. And, like, really, do you know what? That was my goal, be in it for 4 weeks. And, you know, I got all the way to the final, so that was fabulous. But it was a lot more stressful and difficult than I anticipated. When I first went in, I didn't speak that much. I was very nervous and anxious and constantly sweating, in all honesty. And then by the end of it, the anxiety had really lifted. That I never would have done this before The Apprentice. I never would have done public speaking. I didn't even go to networking events. So I really pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and I guess it kind of cured it to an extent. I'm still nervous now on Nana.
No, you don't come across that way. And the challenges. What was your most notable challenge, or probably best moment?
Oh, God, it was all challenging. I think he threw me into being a project manager one day over all the boys. He was like, you work in construction, you've got 4 brothers, you be the project manager. And I'd never worked with any of them before this point, and just kind of went with what they were saying about, you know, we're so good, we're so great, and give them kind of good jobs within the team, and then really lost in a big way. I actually brought my partner back, well, he's now my partner. We have a child together, and I brought him back to be fired, and so he's never going to live that day for the rest of his life.
So your husband, you met on The Apprentice?
Yeah.
And you fired him, he got fired?
I tried to get him fired. I really was like, get rid of the competition. But yeah, he managed to, he stayed in a bit longer. But I did better than him, Nana, which is the most important thing.
That's very important, isn't it? So when did you decide that you were going to go out with each other? Was it during the actual show there, or was it after?
No, it was after. I think in those moments, you know, you're literally working 16 hours a day. There's no time to build those friendships. But after The Apprentice, it's like maybe a 3 or 4 month gap. So you weren't allowed to drink in The Apprentice. Afterwards, when they was giving us wine, I think we got a bit excited.
You weren't allowed to drink at all? I thought they'd get like a glass of wine.
Oh, you get one.
Winning.
But that's just a tease. You know, they give you one little glass of Prosecco to celebrate people coming back, but that's genuinely it. That's all you're allowed once a week.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, no, there was no canoodling in the house. It was afterwards.
Wow. And are you all in the same house? You're on the same house, but different?
Yes, you're all in the same house, on different floors. Girls on one floor, boys on another floor.
Weren't you sick of the others by the time? I mean, I'd get sick of them all after a while.
Some I could have really...
It's tough, isn't it? Because I went to boarding school and you just couldn't escape some of them, so you had to be friends with them.
No escape. And then when you're in the house, you know, there's no TV, no phones, no music, literally nothing. So all you can do is just sit around and get to know each other. So I guess you build friendships fast when you're in there, but also enemies fast.
Well, of course, I came across you because I sort of did one of your events, Women in Construction, and I know that because of your businesses and everything, you've got behind getting women into construction. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as it stands, we're around 15% of women in construction and less than 2% of women on the tools. And after I'd been on The Apprentice, for me, I never really noticed... Obviously, I knew I was a woman in construction, but it wasn't a big thing for me. I was just cracking on, doing what I do. But after The Apprentice, it really shone a light on it, and I literally had thousands and thousands of messages from women and men, but predominantly women saying, like, I've hit a glass ceiling, what should I do? I can't get promoted, I'm worried about this. 2 extremes of being sexually assaulted on site. And at this point, I just thought, well, I've been given this platform. I feel like, I should do something with it and should be representing women in construction. And I guess it just unfolded from there. I have a construction magazine, so we started to profile women, tell them the story, just try and get some representation and promote the stories of women to help attract and retain more women. And then, over the last 6 years, we've worked towards it. And then, as you know, we did the Women in Construction Awards, which was great fun.
And the proceeds, you raised money for the Maggie Oliver Foundation. How did that relationship come about?
I met Maggie in a bar, actually. But I knew who she was, but I bumped into her in Manchester, and she'd been watching The Apprentice. I knew who she was anyway. And then she was telling me about the foundation she was setting up, and I said, keep in touch, let me know how it goes, if there's any way I can help. So we've remained friends since then, maybe the last 5 or 6 years, and I've watched the work that she's doing, and she's genuinely leading a foundation from her heart. Like, she wants to see this change, she wants to do good, and I just think any woman who supports women to that level, sacrificing a career and a life to support other women, I feel like we had to get behind. And how nice as well, the construction industry, which is male-dominated predominantly, that for us to be able to go, we've raised all of this money and give it to Maggie and back to women who need it.
Yeah, and of course, Maggie Oliver's Foundation, if you don't know, and you're listening now, she supports women and girls who have been abused. And she was one of the officers for the Rochdale scandal. She was one of the... She blew the whistle on it, so she's quite an incredible woman, isn't she?
Yeah, gave up her career and blew the whistle, and then since then has gone on to support them and fight still continuously. They're coming up everywhere in Telford, and Maggie is the driving force to get real convictions, not 3 people out of 100 getting put in prison for 12 months. This whole system is flawed and needs changing. So if we can help in any way, that's what we tried to do. Raise awareness and raise...
So you didn't win The Apprentice you think you should have. Who did win that year? Who was it?
There was 2 winners as well.
Oh, that was
Salt to the wound.
Those are 2 winners. That's even worse.
It's even worse.
Are you still in touch with them?
Yeah, I do, actually. Both with the winners, yeah. They're still good friends, man.
That's good. And what are you up to now, then, with your business, and where's it going?
So I'm more focusing on the women in construction side of things. Obviously, we've still got the construction businesses, but we're doing the awards again this year. We had brilliant backing from the industry, companies like Red Row Homes, Hayes, Multiplex, really big businesses all willing to back us, and they're doing it again for a 2nd year. So we're going to be cracking on with that, and also we're starting a Women in Construction networking hub. Wonderful. We've been given a stage at UK Construction Week to run like a culture hub stage, talking about ED&I as a whole, not just women in construction. So this is the main focus. I really want to try and make some change.
So if women want to sort of get into construction, what advice would you give them? Where would they go?
I mean, reach out to us, you know, like I say, we've started a hub, so we're able to help them out, giving them advice, match them up with employers, but, yeah, try and find another woman in construction. There isn't... 15% seems really small, but that equates to about 500,000 women, so try and get yourself a mentor and a connection, somebody, I guess, who looks like you in construction.
So you've got a hub. Is there a website that people can go? What's this?
Yeah, you can find it on designandbuilduk.net. All the information's on there.
Well, Michaela, thank you very much for coming in. It's good to talk to you. And, of course, Michaela Wain, yes, she is an ambassador for women in construction. She has her own business, and, of course, she was an apprentice finalist in 2017. Well, coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? In next week's budget, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt plans to increase fuel duty by 15 pence per litre, which means drivers face increased costs despite the ongoing cost of living crisis. And, of course, the number of people who registered fuel-guzzling vehicles was higher than the number of people registering electric cars, which is now becoming problematic. People don't seem to be wanting to buy these things. And bearing in mind the government are planning to ban the sale of petrol diesel cars by 2030, it doesn't look like they'll reach their targets. So is net zero economic suicide? Stay tuned, that's on the way next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 22 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. And it's time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? In the lead up to the spring budget next week, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has faced pressure to scrap the planned increase to a hike in fuel duty. Now, this rise would see 15p increase per litre of fuel, which would mean that drivers face increased costs, especially as the ongoing cost of living crisis mounts up. And I think also the cost of fuel is actually decreasing, so it's interesting that they should try to increase the duty. Now, the National Audit Office has deemed the government's target to generate all electricity from low-carbon sources by 2035 is making little progress. In addition, there's been a vast increase in the number of people registering petrol cars than electric cars, so people aren't buying into the notion that they should be getting electric cars. And it turns out that a lot of Middle England can't afford electric cars at all. And the current goals of net zero are by 2030, the government hope to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. By 2035, they plan to decarbonise the electric grid. And finally, by 2050, they aim to have reached net zero of all UK sectors. All this for a total estimated cost of £1.4 trillion. However, Professor David Rayner, who is an assistant director of the University of Cambridge's Energy Policy Research Group, has said that reaching net zero as much more than it would cost households twice as much more than the government's estimates. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? I'm joined now by the director of CAR26, Lois Perry, and also senior meteorologist at the British Weather Services, Jim Dale. Right, well, I'm going to start with you, Jim. OK, so we've got some targets by the government that seem to be unreachable. Do you think we can actually do the 2050 thing? Is it realistic?
Well, it was never going to be tomorrow, was it?
Well, 2050 isn't tomorrow. I mean...
No, I recognise that. I always see net zero as being something in terms of an evolution, not a revolution. That's how it has to be. Perhaps we should have started 20, 30 years ago when there was a lot of detractors of this for the reasons. But let me just take viewers back to why we're actually doing this in the first instance, because I think it's extremely important. I'm a meteorologist, so this is all about weather, and that's basically the end game. The change in the weather that will change the climate, that is changing the climate, that will continue to do so into the future. We've seen massive extreme events, not just in our own countries, for example, last year in the summertime when we breached record temperatures, but all around the world. Now, if we're talking economics, there's no more bigger economic than the catastrophes of climate change and what that may well do and how that will impact upon our climate. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that everybody's got to, whether it be an individual, corporate or a government, aiming for net zero, aiming to reduce their CO2 output, which is what this is about. So we get to a neutral point where what you put out basically is offset by what you keep in or what you put back in the ground. That's all we're asking. It's not something that will necessarily affect your back pocket. Now, I know what this is coming to, and the government obviously made a decision. It's them. But think about this for 1 second. The reason that we're having this dilemma, and many countries are not having this dilemma, is because of the state of the economy of this country and how it's gone over the last, let's just say the last few months, but the last several years, if you like. And that's the dilemma that we find ourselves in terms of not being able to afford to move forward. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure I'll add a little bit more in a second or two.
Well, let's get Lois in on this, because I saw Lois shaking her head quite a few times to some of the things you said.
Hi, Nana.
Yeah, I think you're probably not surprised to know that I disagree with almost every single thing that he said, respectfully disagree. And actually, the rest of Europe respectfully disagrees with him as well. You've got Italy and you've got Germany pushing back against the whole 2030 petrol diesel ban and all the other stuff. You've got people saying that all of this is completely unviable. There was an article in today's papers which talked about the fact that heat pumps are not going to be ready, that hydrogen is not going to be ready, that 80% of commercial real estate under net zero laws will be unlettable by 2030, and that also those ridiculous net zero British laws would include residential property, which means that most landlords will just sell their properties, which means that most people won't be able to afford to live anywhere. You know, the whole thing is completely and utterly ridiculous. And why would any chancellor sanction a tax that would shrink the economy, raise inflation and put people on the dole queue, as Howard Cox from Fairfield UK said yesterday? It's absolute madness. And I disagree completely with you, Jim. You're talking about the weather, not climate. Climate's managed over hundreds of thousands of years, not 20 years.
Let's make something clear. Just on that point, the climate has changed. The climate changes all the time. Let's make that absolutely clear, first of all. But it changes over centuries and thousands of years. Bear with me.
Sorry, let him finish. Lois, let him finish.
It's what happened over the last 30 or 40 years and the extreme events and the extreme movements. I mean, weren't you around last summer when we breached 40 degrees? We took away the record temperature, not just by a tenth of a degree, but by 1.5 to 2 degrees.
But Jim, by your own.
It's been much longer.
Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm talking. Jim, by your own admission, you said the climate is changing rapidly over a certain period of time, but you're only looking at 1 year. I mean, surely you couldn't look at that as, oh, my God, this is definite proof. Surely you'd need to look at over, as you said, over a longer period of time to determine whether something real is actually happening.
I understand what you're saying. Let me make it clear. This isn't just about last year. This has been going on. Look at any temperature graph, and that's what we're talking about. That's what CO2 does, and methane added to it even worse. That's what it does. It puts the temperature profile up exponentially against anything that we've seen in the previous, let's just say the previous 400 years.
I'm going to take your point. I'm going to take your point as if I agree with it 100%. I'm going to say I agree with Jim Dow 100%. I believe that CO2 is causing all these big problems, etc., etc. Okay. Even if you take that into consideration, even if you believe that, the fact, even if there were more extreme weather events than 100 years ago, which I don't believe there were, the fact that less people die from them than at any other point in human history is because we are wealthy and because we can afford to create things that, you know, that negate the risk from these extreme weather events. You know, life expectancy has doubled since the Industrial Revolution. It's now 80, not 40, and deaths from extreme weather events are down 90% over the last 100 years. So even if I agreed with you, it is still ridiculous to destroy our economy in the name of net zero. Nobody wants this. Three-quarters of Tory voters don't want it in the Express polling today. 2/3 of Labour voters and 80% of all over 65s. Nobody wants this policy. It is suicide, electoral suicide and economic suicide.
Let Jim respond.
I wouldn't believe a poll in the Express if it hit me in the face, to be frank with you. I'm not sure where you're getting those figures from. Look, this is nice and simple. Net zero isn't just about the CO2. That might be the bottom line, if you like. But what we're talking about here is the environment. We're talking about pollution. We're talking about all the things that we perhaps have gone overboard with, the farming, the agriculture, the practices that have gone on, even the sewage in the rivers, if you like. Look, we don't want to live in a world.
But Jim, that's a different argument. No, but that's a different argument because anybody, you know, the pollution argument, plastic in the rivers, sewage, you know, we would all agree on that. So that's not the point. Net zero specifically is net zero specifically about equalising the carbon, isn't it? So that there's nothing in and nothing out. So if we stick with that.
Okay, so what I would say to you is this is, as I said to you in the very first instance, this is not something that's going to happen overnight or tomorrow. We kind of missed the boat 20 years ago when this was first discovered, when climatologists, people better than me, people who look at the data, people who look at the data, see where it's going, and warn about it. Those warnings went out, big sirens went out that we would be facing around the world. And if it's Lois, if you're talking about people, accepting this, if you like, you talk to people that have been really, really affected. Talk to the people of Pakistan, thousands of people who lost their lives in what happened with the glaciers.
And you're
coming
not
off the
allowing
mountains.
them any economic growth because you're crippling them, and people like you are crippling them by not enabling them to exploit their fossil fuels. Do not talk to me about protecting the third world because greenies are keeping them in the dark age.
I'll let him respond.
Yeah, even this discredited Tory party, do you really think that they would be committing economic suicide by following the path that virtually every single country has agreed to?
No,
this is something
Italy
that's
and Germany have started to push back. People are not doing it, and the Eurozone has postponed their vote on the 2030 petrol diesel ban indefinitely. Okay, so no, the whole world isn't doing this anymore.
I think it's 2035, isn't it, in Europe? I think it's 2035.
That's you. Yeah. Mate, one direct question to Lois. What is your motive for saying what you say? Now, I've got plenty of motives on my
No, you've asked a question. Sorry. You've asked a question. No, Jim. You asked a question. What is the motive for saying what she's saying, Lois?
Okay. Yeah. I was really lucky to grow up in the 80s, yeah, where everything was possible, where you could have your own business, you'd have your own car, you could go anywhere you wanted to, and everything seemed achievable. Now my children don't seem to have that. Are they going to be able to drive? Are they going to be able to travel? Are they going to be able to start their own businesses or rent somewhere or buy somewhere? No. And it's because of net zero policy. That's the reason why I'm doing this, Jim.
I don't see any of what you're saying out there. Nobody's saying you can't drive. Nobody's saying.
Well, listen, sorry, if you both talk over each other. Lois, let Jim finish. Jim, you've got about 30 seconds. I'll give you the last word, Jim.
Yeah, nobody's saying anything about. You seem to be almost putting yourself in a box, saying this is the end of the world. In your respect, well, I can tell you, it's not the end of the world in terms of what we do from day to day and all the rest. It's just changing things for the better, so that we all have a future into the future. So our children have a future. That's what this is about. And as I say, it's step by step. It's not overnight. So
I'm going to have to give Lois 10 seconds to respond because you talked about the box thing, which is not fair. Go on, Lois. Quickly, I've got to move on. Quickly, Lois, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not in a box. You see all the policies that are enacted in the name of net zero, including 15-minute cities, getting people out of their cars. I'm not crazy. I want to protect my children's future. I want them to be as excited about their future as I was in the 80s.
Thank you very much. That's really good to talk to you both. Excellent, thank you. Senior meteorologist at the British Weather Services, Jim Dale, also Director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Thank you so much. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we'll continue with our great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Hi there, it's approaching 25 to 6. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. BBC sport coverages have been affected for a second day by last-minute changes as presenters boycott the broadcaster in solidarity with Gary Lineker. The Match of the Day host was asked if he still worked for the corporation this morning. I can't say anything was his answer. His eldest son, though, says he thinks the presenter will go back to Match of the Day but won't ever back down. Six Nations coverage has gone ahead as scheduled. But it's understood Match of the Day 2, as it was last night, will be much reduced with no presenter, pundits or commentary. The Prime Minister is flying to California to discuss the AUKUS defence deal between the UK, the US and Australia. Rishi Sunak will meet his American and Australian counterparts, during which a deal to supply British nuclear-powered submarines to Australia is expected to be confirmed. The aim of the AUKUS Pact, signed in 2021, is to counter China's threat in the Indo-Pacific region. The Health Secretary's criticised junior doctors for failing to call off their strike tomorrow. Writing in the Telegraph, Steve Barclay has described the 72-hour walkout as incredibly disappointing. The British Medical Association's described Mr Barclay's recent offer to negotiate as merely a feeble attempt to stall proceedings. It is expected to affect many services, including A&E, cancer care and maternity. And I mentioned the Six Nations. Ireland have beaten Scotland 22-7 at Murrayfield, so the Grand Slam remains on. They'll play England next Saturday. TV online and DAB Plus Radio. This is GB News. Now back to Nana.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone.
My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's just coming up to 39 minutes after 5 o'clock. Welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now we return to our great British debate this hour, and I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? In the lead to the spring budget next week, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has faced pressure to scrap the planned increase to a hike in fuel duty. Now, this rise would see a 15p increase per litre of fuel, which means that drivers will face increased costs despite being in the midst of a cost of living crisis. The National Audit Office has also deemed the government's target to generate all electricity from low-carbon sources by 2035 as making little progress. So in addition to that, there's been a vast increase in the number of people registering for petrol cars, more than those for electric-powered ones. So should the government carry on pursuing this net zero whilst the public are still reluctant to pay all these increases in fuel duties and the cost of these cars and so on and so forth? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero economic suicide? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined now by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. And also car salesperson.
Car dealer.
All right, car salesperson, whatever.
Car dealership owner.
Well, OK, car dealer, OK. And adding owner on the end
Although
as well.
I do, I suppose, sell the cars as well.
OK, fine. Right, so Danny, we've got to come to you straight away because this whole thing with net zero...
Do you know, it's infuriating. Boris Johnson in 2020 announced it almost like it was a Brexit dividend because you were right to pull someone up in the interview earlier. European Union... ban on petrol cars, diesel cars, 2035. And he's brought it forward 5 years. My God, man, what are you doing? If it's a Brexit dividend, he should have put it back to 2040. That's getting back control. And I'm sorry, but I've interviewed Jim over the years. He's a smashing lad. But I think he's out of touch with the general consensus about how normal people feel. And at the back of people's minds, they're thinking, what the hell is the point of me going net zero when you've got the likes of India and China pumping out, spewing out, belching out all of this stuff? What is the point? It's almost like a punitive measure. Why are we self-flagellating and punishing ourselves when it comes to net zero? Put it back to 2040. Honestly,
just
electric cars, generally speaking, people are falling out with electric cars. You can't sell them on the used car market because people haven't got confidence in the ability to get from Cornwall to Cumbria.
Well, I was wondering what happens, because obviously there was a lot of snow in parts of the north in this country, and I was looking at all the traffic with all the cars and everything, and I was thinking, God, if they wanted 1 in 4 out of 5 to be electric cars, what happens in weather conditions like that with an electric car? What happens, Danny?
Well, first of all,
they get stuck.
You can't have your heater on. You're going to freeze to death. They're going to find your corpse 36 hours later, stuck in a car without any heating, because if you have the heating on, the battery's going to drain. The great thing about a petroleum engine...
terrible.
It is. They're going to find you like that, a skeleton. The great thing about a petroleum or a diesel engine is the fact that if you're running out of juice, it takes 5 minutes. There's a BP. Grab yourself a Snickers for £2.20 and a family meal deal. There you go. You'll be in and out within 5 minutes. Not with the Alecki car.
You know all the best places, Danny. Christine.
Well, I couldn't agree more. It is economic suicide. I think that was the original question. Is it economic suicide? Yes, it is. And it is putting a ridiculous price on the people who are around today and in the next 20, 30 years for infinitesimal, unrealistic, not worth pursuing so-called gains. I mean, the amount that we produce of carbon emissions is minuscule compared to what China are producing. In the last 8 years, China have produced more than we have produced since the Industrial Revolution.
Although they are producing to make things for us. So
well, they are. So we feel very virtuous.
So this is just offsetting carbon in a way. And just, I mean, it's just rubbish.
But nevertheless, they're building something like 250 power stations, not just in China, but all over the world. They are populating the world with their ideas and their economy, etc. So what we do is just so infinitesimal, and we will pay the most ludicrous economic price. I mean, apparently, the total cost at the moment of this pursuit of net zero is nearly £60 billion a year, and that's £2,000 per household, and it's not worth it. It's crazy. And when will the penny drop with the government?
I don't know. I don't know why it hasn't dropped. It's quite clear. Even the manufacturers of the electric cars have said that we can't manufacture them to the pace that you want them. The people, the middle class who they're expecting to buy them, can't afford to buy them. I can't afford one of them. I'm not paying 44 grand for one of those things. Where will I charge it?
Certainly. We've got a hybrid, largely because we come in and out of London, and we certainly weren't going to pay OLES charge. So if you've got a hybrid, you don't have to. But something that Lois said, which I wanted to pick up on, these new regulations that are coming in for commercially rented properties and landlords renting domestic properties, they are going to be unrentable shortly because of all the rules and regulations that are going to make them, you know, if they don't meet certain carbon requirements, you're not going to be able to rent them. So there's going to be a massive shortage of all these places.
And focus on your central question, is it economic suicide? Economic suicide, I think, is something that is terminal. It's the end game. So I don't think it is suicide, because we're a nation of adapters.
But by that I mean it's self-inflicted. So what you're doing is you're doing it yourself. And potentially, I would say it's unnecessary, especially when the jury is still out on the full science of the net zero thing. Because even if you have zero carbon, or you seem to be zero, what is the feedback? Because, you know, when we do things, we think, oh, well, if I do that, and then everything will be fine. But there's always something in there that you didn't factor would happen. Just like genetically modified food. We did this, we do that, this is perfect food. Actually, we're finding more of this is happening because of that and because of that. So there is always a reaction to every action. So what is the reaction to zero carbon? Have we factored that in? Is what I also worry about.
Well, I think the population, we have been brainwashed about all this nonsense. We really have, and too many people are too big a percentage of people in this country genuinely think that we're going to kill ourselves if we go on in the way that we have been with coal-fired power stations and nuclear, etc., etc. And people genuinely, they don't get the other side of the story. They don't follow the, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, for example, which puts out a totally different set of figures and a totally different viewpoint. And too many people just follow these, be careful what I say, scientists, the woke scientists, and they think that this is gospel. It's not gospel.
May I just... Not that we often disagree, but I think overall the general consensus with science is that the planet is heating up because of man-made activities or man-produced gas. So you'll come across a bit of a climate change denier.
She's not denying climate change.
No, man-made climate change.
No, but she's not saying that either.
She is, sort of.
No, I'm not. The climate has changed throughout millennium. It's gone, everybody knows
what she's saying. CO2 increases the lifespan of the planet.
Well, am I saying what?
That's man-made CO2 is reducing the lifespan of the planet.
I'm not saying
everything probably reduces the lifespan
of the planet. I'm not saying that we shouldn't
That's
try.
A silly question.
The question is that we are.
Everything is dying.
Qualified CO2.
The question is the point is we are rushing towards net zero at the expense of this country's economy and this country's people, while people in other parts of the world don't give a damn. I'm not a climate change denier.
No, but you did. You asked her about the climate
CO2.
No. People use the word denier because they want to cast back to Holocaust denier, and it's.
Well, I don't know. You're not doing a comparison again with.
But it is something.
Well, maybe
anybody who
you're talking about language of the 30s again. No, we can't do that. Let's not go back there.
No, anybody who challenges the acceptable wisdom about climate change is called a climate change denier. I do not deny that
do you know what?
It's been changing for millennia.
And I do actually think that it's almost like someone's trying to insult your intelligence by saying
they are.
And the actual thing is nobody's denying the climate change.
No.
Everything changes. Nothing stays the same.
Changes.
It is quite obvious. But I think the question that people are saying is how much impact does man-made CO2 really have on the planet?
That's all I said.
And that's the question.
That's all I said.
You never said that. I
actually said man-made CO2.
You didn't
now
say
you
the
two.
sentence.
I'm sorry. I seem to have caused a row between you.
You always do. You always do, Christine. Right. Well, this show's nothing without your views. Let's welcome some of our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. I've got 4 of you. Let's start with David Barham in Watford. David, are we committing economic suicide with this net zero? I was going to say baloney, but I don't want to spoil it. What do you think?
Yes, we are, unfortunately, Nana. Just taking the electric car argument, for instance, they rape parts of Africa and Australia for the minerals that they need to drive the car, which costs us electricity to power the car, so it's not green. Net zero cannot work unless we have the whole world actually agreeing to a net zero policy, because what's the point of Britain going zero if China, America, India are pumping out carbon into the atmosphere? It doesn't change a thing.
Especially after we're sort of buying stuff from them, so they make it and the carbon comes out from there. From their thing. Right, Miranda Richardson. There she is in Northamptonshire. Not the Miranda Richardson, but Miranda Richardson. Miranda, what do you think?
Hey, Nana. Well, it's a classic example of the do as I say, not do as I do club, isn't it? But they're all telling us what we should be doing and we should be achieving. But are they going to stop, getting in the planes and flying across the world to go to other countries for meetings, for the next thing? They're all going to be sitting at home on Zoom? Of course not. Net zero is just not going to happen. It's not going to work. And in the meantime, we're sitting back, as a nation being told we've got to push on with this. Absolute load of baloney, marvellous baloney. And I think Christine said it earlier, we're brainwashed into thinking we've got to be like this. Well, we just haven't. We can do what we can do. We can all do our bit and our effort. But to go net zero, impossible.
Let's go to Jackie Sampson. She's there in St Albans. Jackie.
Yeah, I read somewhere today that decarbonisation actually means deindustrialisation. And I can't see how making life more expensive and harder to meet these targets is going to be anything other than certainly economic chaos, even if it's not economic suicide. I'm in the aviation industry and I cannot imagine the impact on my jobs and all the jobs in the transport industry, the resulting service industries, the car industry, by pushing this carbon agenda. And I also think it's unrealistic, and I agree with other things other people have said, and hypocritical, because in order to have the components to make these environmentally friendly things. We've got to rape and pillage poorer countries. So we're just farming out the problem. And again, as Miranda said, we've got all these people flying on private jets to tell us what to do. Do as I say.
Yeah, that's a laugh, isn't it?
And I'm not happy about that.
COP27. There's been 27 of them. Certainly, Dr. Certainly Moodley in Milton Keynes. What's your view?
Good afternoon, Nana. I agree with everyone on the panel and everyone that's discussing this great British debate. As you can see, Nana, there is no clear-cut solution to achieving net zero. But what is clear is that it's putting an economic strain on our country, and not only on our country, on other countries globally. So, yes, definitely, I think we can sort of think that this is actually causing economic suicide in achieving a net zero. But at the same time, Nana, I do think we do need to do something about climate change.
Thank you very much, Seshni. And very succinct too. Crikey, I didn't even have to stop you. Thank you. That was Seshni in Milton Keynes, Miranda Richardson in Northamptonshire, David in Watford and Jackie in St Albans. Thank you so much. Right, for those our great British voices, it's now time for Supplement Sunday, where my panel and I discuss some of the news stories that caught our eye. I'm joined by author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. I'm going to start with Danny. Danny, yours is about Brits being too grotty for Lanzarote.
Well, it's a real slap in the old fat face for us all-inclusive holidaymakers from Great Britain. They're actually going after the German market. Apparently the Germans, those Germans, they spend more dough, they're more sophisticated, they're less likely to get into a punch-up at 3 o'clock after an all-inclusive night out, and so they're going for the smaller quantity but higher quality. So it's not all about the size, it's about what you do with it.
Crikey, well, you're out then. Have you been to Lanzarote, Christine?
No, I haven't.
Oh, have you been? It's ace.
No,
I love Lanzarote. It's a volcanic island.
Is it?
They filmed one of the James Bond movies there.
Is it?
It's supposed to be like the moon. Oh. It's great. Oh, yeah.
Is it?
Lanzarote. It's only a 3-hour flight.
I'm going to Ibiza later in the year for a wedding,
Christine.
so that'll be nice.
Yeah, very nice. Christine, OK, so
well, it's another sort of tourist-related theme, but this time it is because dear Rishi Sunak, when he was the Chancellor, he stopped foreign tourists being able to reclaim the VAT so they could get their goods that they bought here 20% cheaper. Now, they can only do that if they have the goods flown directly or sent directly to their country. So what has happened now is that two-thirds... After the pandemic, obviously, they stopped because of COVID. But two-thirds, it has now reached two-thirds of pre-pandemic level. So that means we are getting two-thirds less money from rich foreign tourists because they cannot claim back the 20%. It's madness. It's just another economic suicide.
Another one of those. We keep doing it.
Another of those.
Well, listen, and finally to my supplement, the Welsh Government has been advised to destroy statues that glorify powerful, older, able-bodied white men. Yes, examples of these statues are Admiral Nelson, the Duke of Wellington. They claim that it can be offensive to people today who see them in a different light, potentially seeing them as aggressors and who conquered peoples to expand the British Empire. We're at it again.
As a middle-aged, fat, white guy, I think the world has gone mad.
You'd be boxed in.
I would be. It would take a lot of boxing. I thought I'd get in there first. The world has gone mental.
Bonkers.
People are deranged, but as soon as you argue against it, racist, fascist.
The people they're talking about are people like Nelson. I mean, you know, we're not talking about ogres. It's ridiculous. They'll have him down from his column in Trafalgar Square before you can say Jack Robinson.
It's really sad the way things are going, that people feel that they need to sanitise history and make us sort of, just try and sort of retell history in a way so that people don't feel bad. It's all about hurty feelings. We don't want to hurt your feelings. So what we'll do is we'll take this away when actually the historical context of that thing is essential to our understanding of history so we can move forward and
learn
not
the
make the
history,
same mistakes.
Learn all the aspects if you want to delve in a bit more, but don't cancel statues. It's ridiculous.
This cancel culture. Well, listen, what do you think then? Should we smash them? No, don't smash them. Right, so on today's show, I've been asking, should the Director-General of the BBC resign? And according to our Twitter poll, 35% of you say yes, 65% of you say no. I don't think he should resign either. Do you think he should resign?
No, I don't.
No.
I think he should discipline all of the people who went on this ad hoc strike. And they should give them verbal warnings, written warnings.
He should finish the job he started.
Well, thank you so much to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Christine, thank you so much. And also, where's Danny? And also, journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. And as ever, a huge thank you to you at home for your company. I'll be back next Saturday, same time, same place.
Hello, I'm Craig Snow, and here's your latest forecast on the Meteorist. Well, the week ahead does look like it's going to be unsettled across the UK. Risk of some further sleet and snow as well, especially across the northern half of the country during the first part of the week. But for the rest of Sunday, we do actually have mild air across most of the UK. Cold air just holding on across the very far north of the country. But this mild air does come with a lot of rain, and this band of rain will actually move its way northwards as we go through the course of the night, accompanied by some brisk winds, especially across the southern half of the country. Could turn quite windy here for a time as the night goes on. And as that rain bumps up into the colder air across the far north, we will start to see some sleet and snow. But in the south, no problems with temperatures falling not much lower than 10 to 11 degrees in most towns and cities. So Monday across the south, generally going to be a blustery day with some bright spells, but also some outbreaks of rain. But to the north, this band of rain will start to actually sink its way southwards again, turning increasingly to sleet and snow across Scotland and eventually across Northern Ireland and Northern England too. So for this part of the world, we could see some further disruption as we go through the course of tomorrow, courtesy of the snow. But to the south of it, a mild day once again could see highs reaching 14 or 15 degrees. Into the evening, the cold air begins to sink its way a bit further southwards, so risk of some sleet and snow across parts of Wales and eventually into the Midlands too. And overall, a cold and icy night to come across the northern half of the country. To the south of it, the rain will take a little bit longer to clear, so probably no real problems with frost across the southeastern parts of the country as we start Tuesday. But Tuesday generally will be a cold day for all of us. Plenty of bright spells actually to be had, but also the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the northern half of the country. And then as we kind of look towards the middle part of the week, mild air does look like it's going to return eventually, especially across the southern half of the country, but it will come with the risk of some further rain.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome to Gloria Meets, two Conservative MPs in this evening's show that I've been trying to get for absolutely ages. First up, it's Andrea Jenkins.
It got aggressive, telling me to buy a stab vest, and he just got off with a caution. He said, I was bored and I hit the Tories. You know, and I think that is unacceptable.